Hi everyone, it's Danny. Okay, today we're gonna discuss about Bulbophyllum orchids. I promised that I would make this video because many of you have recently become interested in Bulbophyllum orchids, which is wonderful because I love them. Alrighty, so first off, Bulbophyllums are really easy to care for. They're really not as scary as you might think, and really you can do great with them in a home environment as well. And if you didn't know, Bulbophyllums are the most diverse family of orchids there is. They practically have about 2,000 different species, plus they're hybrids, so imagine that. And as I was saying, they really are not fussy orchids and not that hard to keep, so let's start with temperature. Now, I would have to say these orchids are intermediate growing. They don't really like hot temperatures, but they don't really like cool temperatures either. And intermediate growing orchids, I think, are the most suited for home environments because in a home, we maintain the temperature that feels comfortable to us. And luckily enough, they will feel comfortable as well if we are. To be quite honest, I didn't have major drama with this guy in the winter time. He endured 16 degrees Celsius at night with no real trouble. But he really wasn't the happiest in the sense that he didn't really grow too fast. However, I had a really bad case of severe dehydration coupled with high temperatures. This particular Bulbophyllum was standing near a window which got really hot. And as you can see, the new growth simply dried off of it. So really, I wouldn't try to keep Bulbophyllums in very hot environments, or at least some hybrids or species. Regarding light, they really don't need tremendous amounts of light. I would say a little bit more than what you would give to a Phalaenopsis orchid, but certainly not as much as you would give a Cattleya orchid. I kept this guy, which I managed to rebloom in a eastern exposure, but he received direct sunlight only in the springtime and autumn time. Because of the height of the sun, I couldn't provide morning sun all year round, and he did absolutely great. And other than that, I kept it in bright shade, let's call it like that, pretty similar to what I would give a Phalaenopsis, maybe a little bit higher, and he rebloomed, he did very well, so he really does not need quite a lot of light. The most important factor for a Bulbophyllum is, however, moisture. Now these guys like to stay constantly moist, and this can be quite tricky in some environments. I don't let my Bulbophyllums orchids go completely bone dry. When I see the media is slightly moist, I give them a good water, and so far so good. I think this is the major issue with Bulbophyllum orchids. They do like to remain moist all the time. And since we're talking about moisture, we need to discuss media and the type of pot or mount we're using. For my Bulbophyllums, I like to use a mixture of bark and sphagnum moss, as you can see here, although the sort of a basket or pot that I keep it in is very ventilated. So the choice of media will have to belong to you in accordance to your environment. If you live in a very humid environment, pure bark chips might do very well for you and your Bulbophyllum orchids, while if you live in intermediate temperatures, let's say, a mixture of sphagnum moss and bark chips can actually make your life easier, maintain the orchid more hydrated. You wouldn't have to water so often, and I just think it's a better solution than pure bark chips for these particular guys. About the pots you are using, well, you have to take into account the creeping nature of these orchids. They don't grow upwards. Some Bulbophyllums just creep on a horizontal level, some really do tend to be pendant, so people usually use baskets or mounts for keeping their Bulbophyllums rather than a normal pot. And this is easier. I think a wider rather than taller pot is best for these orchids. I keep my Bulbophyllum orchids either in baskets, like in this case, and you already see the pendant nature of this guy, but also mounted, and I have to say they're going quite well. This is a new acquisition and already it's starting to produce new roots, so it's doing quite well. The only difference is that I have to water this mount every day, while this guy I need to water every 3 days or so. So the choice of pot, again, will have to belong to you and your possibilities, your lifestyle, depending how much time you have to devote to your orchid to maintain it properly hydrated. But I would have to say that normal or standard pots are not necessarily the best choice when it comes to most Bulbophyllum hybrids or species. Regarding fertilizer, I just give these guys whatever I give to my other orchids. Bulbophyllum orchids, or the vast majority of them, don't require a winter rest of some sort, so I don't completely cut off fertilizer. But in the winter time, since I have pretty low temperatures and pretty low light, I don't fertilize as often. But I do this with all of my other orchids, so Bulbophyllums don't have a special fertilizer regime. I personally used both a bloom booster and a high nitrogen fertilizer, but I switched them from one month to another, and it was really okay for the orchid. If you don't want to hassle with fertilizer, just go for a balanced fertilizer and just fertilize regularly all year round. Regarding the orchid itself, it's really not a flimsy orchid, I would have to say. It's pretty resilient, although it does have a soft spot. Now, if you know a bit about bulbophyllums, you know that many articles suggest that you don't repot bulbophyllums that often, if at all, if possible. That's both true and false. This guy was repotted twice in a year and a half because I did some mistakes with it, and it handled everything really well, but I had other bulbophyllums that didn't quite handle, let's say, repotting so well. But there's only one explanation to this. It's not the repotting itself, it's the amount of roots the orchid still has. So the bulbophyllums that did not have any roots, or the roots they had were really sick, those ones tend to not make it or not bounce back as fast. However, the bulbophyllums that had a decent root system had absolutely no trouble with repotting and all of that. So when you repot a bulbophyllum, try as much as possible to not destroy the fragile roots. If you have some media still attached to the roots, leave it there, or try to remove like the biggest pieces or the most rotten pieces, but do try to leave alone the roots, because if you damage too much the roots, the orchid, well, depending of course on the state of health, will bounce back faster or slower, or if it's very sick, it might actually die. So from this perspective, they're not the most resilient. But if you have a well-established orchid, it's really not a flimsy orchid. You shouldn't have too much trouble in maintaining it healthy and in good condition. Now, the flowering habits and all of that will depend, of course, on the variety you have, the species, hybrid, and so on. This is the Bulbophyllum Elizabeth and Buckleberry, which I had in bloom. I did a really nice video on it, and you can click on a corner of the screen to see it right now if you missed it. This particular Bulbophyllum produces pendant blooms, so keeping it in a basket is really okay for the blooms as well, for the display and so on. The only issue I had was that the spike almost got ripped apart because it was touching the rim of the pot. So you need to keep an eye on your Bulbophyllum. If you have that type of Bulbophyllum which likes to stay pendant, you might want to be careful with the flower spike and observe it, and if somehow it goes into the rim of the pot, be careful and try to stabilize it upwards until it actually grows over the side of the pot. For this reason, mounted orchids might actually do better, might be less hassle than the ones you pot. Also, you can try to pot the Bulbophyllum a little bit on top of the pot itself, on top of the media as well, and this should make life easier when the Bulbophyllum decides to bloom. Now, I have to issue a little warning here. Bulbophyllums, as beautiful and spectacular as they might be, some of them might be really stinky. And when I say stinky, it's really not pretty. And this is because their pollinators are flies, and we all know what flies are attracted to. So if you keep your orchid in a house in a small room, do check out its description before you buy it and see if it has a foul smell or not. Some Bulbophyllums, however, have a wonderful fragrance, while others don't have a fragrance at all. So if foul smell is an issue for you, do check out the description before you purchase the orchid. So to sum it up, for most Bulbophyllum orchids, you need to provide intermediate temperatures, intermediate to bright light, but not too much direct sun. It's best that you keep them more moist than too dry, and when you repot them, do be careful with the root system, because I think that's their soft spot. But other than that, I really don't consider them to be very fussy orchids, and you should definitely give it a go, at least with one variety. Okay everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. If I forgot to mention something, just leave me a comment down below and I'll answer your questions. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your orchid friends. Also, feel free to leave me other types of questions regarding orchids or other orchids in the comment section below and I'll get back to you. If you click on the left side of your screen, you'll be directed to orchidnature.com, where you'll find care sheets, identification sheets, and also you can talk to us in the forum section. And if you click on the right side of your screen, you'll watch another orchid video. Thank you for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye!